Hi everyone, I'm Palma Accardi and you're watching Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, Irish Pub, every Sunday night at 7 p.m.
Sunday evening. I'm meteorologist Dan Skeldon. Really honored to be joined by a meteorological legend in South Jersey and Philadelphia, and he's worn many hats. He's flown into hurricanes. He's forecasted hurricanes and nor'easters. He really needs no introduction. Meteorologist Tom Lamaine, thanks for stopping by.
Most of that is probably worth fact checking, but that's okay.
I mean, not that far of a walk or drive from you being an Atlantic City resident, right?
I can walk here.
You can walk here.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I have walked here and at times crawled home. It's the Irish Pub, isn't it?
The Irish Pub is what it's all about. That's right. And I mean,
No.
Palm and I were chatting off camera. I mean, your credentials, your life experience is huge. Give us can you give us a 1 minute or 2 minute kind of background on everything you've done? Like, who is Tom Lamaine, and what brings you here?
The show's not long enough. I basically, as I was telling Palm off camera, I just did everything that came along. I said, I'll try this, and I'll try this. I never set out to be a broadcaster. Never set out to be a weathercaster. Became a weathercaster simply because they were hard up for a weather guy, and the most credentials I had as a sportscaster at that time was that I was a Navy pilot. And without that, I wouldn't have gotten into weather. But, I'm very fortunate that I never sent audition tape. I've never sent a resume out, never applied for a job. They all just, and I said, I'll try this, I'll try this. To answer your question, everything that came along, I'll try it. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. Fortunately, everything worked. I got away with it for 50 years.
That's awesome.
Now, what got you started in your career in radio?
Broke my arm playing football here in Atlantic City. Coach sent me up to the broadcast booth to be a spotter because the guy who was doing the games at that time needed somebody who, and the coach said, you know all the plays, you can't play, so go up there and help them out. And at that summer, they asked me, what are you doing? I said, well, beach patrol, I get off at 6. Can you get on the air at 8 o'clock? And I did, at that time, the station did a minute of local news following 4 minutes of national news. And I did that. I read, it was a rip and read, back then.
Yep.
And one day the guy who was playing the records got into it with the general manager, and the general manager fired him on the spot and said, get in there temporarily and play records. Okay. And so I played records, and he said, see how long this goes. But I found out by playing records, I could get into record hops. And back then, they were very lucrative and paid my way through college.
And you're still playing records at Longford Media?
Yes, I am, Dan.
First Sunday of every month.
Most
right?
of those records are the ones I played when I was doing record hops. And I have a collection of vinyl, and I say it's the vinyl frontier.
Everything comes full circle, I guess. And as a meteorologist, you forecasted, South Jersey weather, and being a South Jersey, native and resident, you've lived South Jersey weather. How do you think? All right, I guess. Well, let me ask you this: how do you think, since this is Tidal Flooding Talk, what are the challenges as a broadcaster communicating the dangers of tidal flooding?
Well, most of the time, folks who have lived where they live get a pretty good idea of what a 2-foot tide or a 3-foot tide is going to do. And in many cases, those people can teach me, hey, is Elberon Avenue going to flood? Well, did Elberon Avenue flood when we had a 2.5-foot tide last time and a northeast wind? Yeah, well, it's going to flood again. I think if you let people know what the conditions are going to be, what the tide is going to be, whether it's a moon tide or a tidal surge, northeast wind, whatever. Most of the time, those folks know what the results and what the conditions are going to be like, and they can draw their own conclusions. Are they going to stay? I mean, I was born on September 14th. What's the height of hurricane season?
think it's 3 days before that, actually.
So you can imagine how many of my birthdays were really messed up by hurricanes. So the first one I remember is when I was like 5 years old, and we didn't have any warnings back then. And all of a sudden I look out the window and the water's starting to come in the window. And I'm going, hey, Mom, I think we ought to send the kids home because it looks like bad weather. But to answer your question, most folks, if they've been there for a while, you tell them what's going to happen, what the conditions you think are going to be like. Do you remember what it was like when we had these conditions the last time? And if you do, you'll know what to do this time. That was my philosophy.
Let me just ask you one quick follow-up. What do you do if you're a tourist? And let's say you don't know what the last time was, you don't know what Sandy was, you don't know what this storm is. And like this time of year, let's say a storm doesn't hit in late October like Sandy, but a storm hits in the peak of hurricane season. How do you communicate the danger to visitors and tourists?
Talk to a year-rounder.
That's a good short, succinct answer.
Somebody who lives year-round, maybe the bartender or the waitress that you go to for a restaurant that you're attending while you're on vacation. Maybe the lady behind the counter at the saltwater tavern store is a resident. Listen to them. They'll tell you that, last time we had these conditions, we had this much water. You want to go back home or do you want to stay? That's your choice.
Now, there are terms that meteorologists frequently use while forecasting flooding, and I know Dan has explained this before as well, but could you tell us the difference between minor, moderate, and major flooding?
One word: neighborhood. Minor flooding could affect your neighborhood. In some neighborhoods, could affect the residents of that neighborhood more than moderate flooding because they're in a lower area. They're in an area where the storm drains, instead of draining the rainwater out, brings the back bay water in. For instance, the other night, I was coming back from somewhere on the mainland, and we noticed water in the streets around Mediterranean, Melrose Avenue. I said, okay, must be a moon tide. And it was.
New moon, right? Yep.
And people see a clear sky, haven't had rain in a month of Sundays, and yet there's flooding in the streets. Well, that was minor, and it was I think it was barely minor, right, Dan?
It was.
It reached a barely minor level, but it was flooding the streets in that part of the inlet. Whereas anybody else in other parts of the town are saying, what flooding? So, did I answer your question, by the way?
I think so.
Moderate, it depends on where you live. And again, I always go back to the experience of those who live there. They'll know. If you tell them we're going to have a 2-foot departure, they'll know whether to move the car or not.
And do you think that having these recent storms, like when I first started forecasting down here, the storms of the yardstick storms that people used to compare were 44, 62, and a lot of us don't remember those. Us newbies,
I do.
Us transplants. You do. Jim Everwine does, who we had on the show as well. But do you think it's helpful to have storms like we have Jonas, we have Sandy, we have Irene, we have these? The nor'easter of January 22nd.
I remember that.
2000.
Whether it was Jonas or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't use other Weather Channel names, but do you think it's helpful, as bad as those storms were, to use them as like measuring sticks to say, all right, remember Sandy? Kind of to your point earlier. Remember Sandy? Remember what Sandy did to your house? This will be like that.
Sure.
This will be a foot above it. Does it help to have those recent storms?
Absolutely.
To compare with?
Sure. And having said that, as you know, no two storms are the same.
Right.
Sandy could have come at a full moon. It was a perfect storm. Or Sandy could have come at a mid-moon tide. So no two storms you have to put all the factors together to determine whether this storm is exactly like or close as you can get to being like the other storm. But no two storms are alike.
That's a good point.
Now, you've actually worked in both sports and weather.
I've gotten away with both, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, how was it preparing for both of those segments, and did they ever complement each other in any way?
The first time I did weather, I did the 6 o'clock sports and the 11 o'clock weather. I had just done 6 o'clock sports, and I had my rundown ready to do the 11 o'clock sportscast. I was a sports anchor at Channel 3. And the news director came in and said, "We need you to do the weather." I'm looking around the room, and you must be talking to me. You talking to me? And yeah, well, Joe Whitty, who was the forecaster at Channel 3 at the time, was sent down to cover Hurricane David. And all of a sudden, management felt that they needed a weather presence on the 11th. And I said, "Well, what makes you think I'm the weather presence you need?" "Well, you're a Navy pilot, and that qualifies you as the most logical person we can have do the weather tonight." So, and Joe did his own forecasting, which was, back then, it was in the 70s. Back then, it was very unusual. And I walk in, and I see all the charts and everything, and I was military trained, even though, I had to know something about the weather as a pilot, because you're in the middle of the Pacific. You can't call weather and say, "Yo, what's happening?" You had to do your own forecasting, and you had to do your flight briefings to figure out what kind of weather you were going to encounter when you were on a mission. But it started to come back to me, and we didn't have a relationship with the National Weather Center or any other weather service. Joe did his own forecasting, which means I had to do my own forecasting. And it was a hurricane off the southeast coast of Florida. So talk about, jumping right into the fire.
Yeah.
That answer your question, by the way? I did sports. I had to prepare for sports that night. And at 6:45, the news director came in and said, "Go in and prepare for the weather." And that was the first. So when Joe went on vacation, he did a pretty good job that time. Let him fill it. So for several years, I did weather and sports at Channel 3. Mainly sports until one time they called me and said, "We have to determine what you're going to be, a weathercaster or a sportscaster." And I said, "Well, what are you most desperate for?" "Talk to my agent." And the agreement I had was, "Well, if you'll pay for, we have a relationship with Drexel. We can tutor." No. I said, "How about if I get a degree? I mean, a full degree, not a mail-in degree, but a full degree." So I sent to Fordham for my transcripts. I had enough science credits to go into the science program at Drexel and get an MA Associate's degree in atmospheric science. I wanted to do that because after doing sports for like 12, 13 years, you don't want to come on the air and they're going to say, "What's this guy know about weather? He's a jock." And I made Channel 3 video, me going to class, in school, getting my degree, and so everybody knew that I was as close to legit as you were going to get.
Wow.
And,
Did you ever
again,
think that was going to be your path?
Never.
Weather?
Never. But again, as I said earlier, this looks good. And as it turned out, at the time, timing is everything. At the time I decided to go along with the weather deal, they were minimizing sports and just blowing up weather way out of line. I heard a news director say just before that happened, "We don't really need to give our local sports guys 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes of sports because there's ESPN and there's Fox Sports now." And I go, "Man, we've got 4 pro teams in this town." So I said, "Okay, if that's the way you're going to go, I probably have a better future in weather." And one of the smart decisions I made was to say, "Okay, I'll take the weather job you send me to school, pay for my master's degree," and they did. They had a further education program. You get a 3-point GPA, they pay 100%. You come back with a 2.5, they pay 80%. Guess who was getting 3-point GPAs? Me, because I never paid a dime. And, it was a decision that I didn't think I would have to make. But like I said earlier, I'll try it, see what happens. And I remember, to give you an example of how they were compressing sports, I would sit next to Beasley Reese, who was a sports anchor at Channel 3 for a long time, former pro football player. And I would say, "Beasley, those 2 15-second stories that you have," because I used to have it too, in case, they needed them or a story crashed. "Give sports 30 more seconds." I said, "You're going to use those stories because they gave me 3.5 minutes. And there is no need for me to do 3.5 minutes of weather. So Beasley, what are they going to do? If I stop doing weather at 2:45, back to you, Bees." And I really, I didn't want to, blow it up and over a weathercast something that wasn't necessary.
And they never do that at all on any network today, right? They never blow up weather anymore. I wish. But,
Plus, did I say I got away with it? I did.
one of the more interesting things I know just from past experiences, Hurricane Gloria hits the South Jersey shore, and a lot of folks remember Hurricane Gloria. It was kind of like, the storm. There was a 62 storm. Not much happened in the 70s. And then the 80s was Gloria. 90s, you had the perfect storm, and so on and so forth. And while a lot of people were experiencing Gloria down here on the ground, you had a different perspective on Gloria. Want to talk a bit about that?
I had good relationships with Neil Frank, who was the National Hurricane Center director at that time. And the news director at Channel 3 said, can you call in one of your cards? Like, can you get on a hurricane hunter tomorrow? Well, it happens that more often than not, probably most of the time, if not all the time, when the hurricane gets into a certain position, the media slot on the hurricane hunter is taken. Neil Frank, unbeknownst to me, said, well, Lamaine, we'll put him on the crew and we'll make him work. And that way we basically have a media guy on the hurricane hunter, but he's working. And I did. I would take drop sounds. I would check the radar. I would, when you're the hurricane hunter, the information you send out is what everybody else hears. It comes from there first. We relay it to a National Hurricane Center in Coral Gables, Florida. You know how it goes. And then they send it out, disperse it to the media. Well, I took that job and said, okay. By the time we picked up Hurricane Gloria, it was just southeast of Georgia. And we followed it all the way up so that it was going inland over Canada. And these are 10-hour flights, missions. But because it was going inland in 2 or 3 hours, rather than send another plane up to relieve us, they extended our mission. So I'm bouncing around in a hurricane for 13 hours. And we only had enough fuel to get back to Andrews Air Force Base instead of Florida. So I landed Andrews, and I had to take a commercial flight to get back to Miami, pick up my gear, and get back to Philly. But Neil Frank, I think I was the first and only guy ever to do this. He said, Tom, if you want to, you can go on the air on Channel 3 live from inside the Hurricane Eye. And for Neil, for any National Hurricane Center director to say that, they know that, because when you say something from that, it's gospel. That's exactly, you say where it is, what the winds are, that's where it originates. And for him to give me that credibility, I thought it was pretty good.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now you've broadcasted both here and in Philadelphia. Can you tell us some of the differences with those forecasts and weather?
The difference. Well, it's pretty similar. Only you're moving it 60 miles east. Dan will tell you. I mean, you're the most difficult forecasts, I think, are winter storms, because more often than not, the rain-snow line is right over this area. And depending on the influence of the ocean, influence of the river, influence of the mountains, forecasting where rain is going to begin and snow is going to end. This area, Dan, you can jump in and say, I think is the most challenging in forecasting winter storms. It's easier, not easier, but it's not as difficult to handle tropical systems, I think, because the instruments that you can use to forecast tropical systems don't work a lot better than the instruments you use to forecast rain-snow line. When I first started doing the weather, we had what was the 57 radar. It was radar that was used by the military. We had a deal with the National Weather Center, the National Weather Service, Mount Holly, while I was in Philadelphia at the time. If the station paid for the broadcast line to broadcast the radar from Pomona at the NAFEC Center to the Federal Building in Philadelphia, they would let us use the radar. So we had raw radar all the time. We were the first station to have radar. But one thing about that, as antiquated as the 57 radar was, it was really good at determining where the rain-snow line is, because it would pick up reflectivity. So if it was a bright line, 9 times out of 10, that was changing over from rain to sleet and eventually snow. I love that radar. It was, it's not Doppler, but it was pretty good.
Now we have hurricanes in the summer, we have nor'easters in the winter. Our threat along the coast is a year-round thing. I mean, what do you think? Do you think nor'easters get the respect along the coast? Hurricanes get the name. Hurricanes get the hurricane center. There's no nor'easter center. Hurricanes, get retired. Nor'easters don't necessarily. Do you think coastal residents, respect both equally? I mean, they're different storms, but they can both obviously be destructive.
Depends on how long you've lived on the coast. If you lived through the March '62 storm, I think you have enough respect for a nor'easter, and that's all that was. That was the most devastating storm, more devastating than any tropical system, because it lasted 3 days. And I was marooned. I was waiting to go to boot camp, and I went out with the news cruiser to find out. At the time, I was working at the station on Atlantic Avenue, and we were off the air. So the first thing let's go out to the transmitter house and find out why we're not on the air. Go out there. Little did we know that the 400-foot tower had blown over. And we're walking in what is basically electrified water. So we couldn't figure out why. Well, on the way back, the only street that was the highest street to get from Atlantic Avenue to Absecon Boulevard, where the tower was Illinois Avenue, which is now Martin Luther King. On the way back, the news cruiser starts to float. And we're just making it, and it's cold. It's March. So that water's cold. You can't stay in it. Long. We just say, we're heading to that house over there, hope the guy lets us in. Oh, come on in. I kept saying, well, let's see, low tide will go out. Never went out, kept coming in. Up, low tide, nope. We know how many successive high tides there were. We were up on the guy's second floor because his first floor was totally inundated by floodwater. No heat, we're cold, I'm wet. And the only way we got out, I saw a National Guard amphibious vehicle coming down, and he's yelling, I'm on the roof at this time, to wave him down. I'm using bed sheets to wave him down. And he said, we can't get too close to the house because of the surging water. The amphib would hit the house and destroy it. So he said, I'm going to throw you a line, and you guys are going to have to hand walk. So I said, we're going to learn. If you don't know how to hand walk, you're going to learn. So the National Guardsman threw a rope. I secured it around the chimney of the house, and we hand walked from the roof of the house onto the amphib, and the amphib brought us to dry ground.
And that's one thing a nor'easter can stall like that. Hurricane hits, wham, bam, done. Nor'easters can do what you just described.
Keep waiting for the tide to go out, and it don't go out. It keeps coming in.
That's right.
And back then, there's no phone, we didn't have electricity or anything. So I really at that point, I had no idea what was happening. I'm starting to get concerned. And one of the guys who was with me, he's from Minnesota, and he goes, hey, this guy lived here all his life, and he keeps saying the tide's going out, and it keeps coming in. We're really in trouble. This is doomsday, and it was doomsday for a lot of people. So in answer to your question, nor'easters can be just, if not more, destructive than a hurricane, a tropical system.
Now, with two meteorologists here, I think I would be robbing our viewers if I didn't ask for a quick weather report.
He's active, I'm not.
What's the weather like for us?
We get some rain Tuesday. We got our next shot of comfort Wednesday, Thursday. No hurricanes. We had Chris off the coast. We had some waves last week. We had Burrow off the coast. Have some waves today, but pretty quiet in the tropics now, so we're good. You're not flying into any hurricanes this year?
I'm done.
You're done.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, 13 hours in a hurricane, going in and out.
Yeah, you did 2 missions in one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I paid my dues. That's enough. I agree with him, by the way.
Yeah.
Whatever he just said is fine.
Okay.
Well, we are here at the Irish Pub every Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Always bring you a different guest. Really honored to have had Tom Lamaine here this week. Just one of the most storied guests that we've had on this show, and one of the most, your resume is, I was always impressed, with all the life experience that you've had on it. So thank you for sharing some of those experiences with us tonight.
If you're around long enough, Dan, you have a lot of stories. That's the bottom line.
the New Jersey Coastal Coalition would like to thank you for being our guest with an Irish pub t-shirt.
Oh, yeah. Maybe they won't throw me out now. Hey, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. I know I'm from the inlet, and we got a bad rep, us guys from the inlet, but yo, give me some slack here.
You're going to be a bouncer.
Well, you're
Yeah, that's
official
you.
now.
Yeah.
Well, is that an offer?
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never
Kathy.
Oh, you need a bouncer? Inlet guys are perfect for bouncers. Tom will tell you. Well, we don't take any stuff.
Well, thank you again for
You're
joining
quite welcome,
us.
Paul.
Don't forget to follow us. Did I cut you to the
No,
chase?
because you know them better than I do. So go
Don't
ahead.
forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and our website, njcoastalcoalition.com.
We have great lineup of guests all the way through the end of summer. We will be here each and every Sunday. You can come down and join us and join the conversation live on Facebook. Tom, thank you.
You're welcome, Dan.
Always
Thank
a
you very
pleasure.
much, Tom.
Quite welcome.
Have a good night, guys.